hard for us today to realize what the perilous situation was of the early culture people in the Near East. The beginnings of agriculture and domestication of animals for the Western world begins in the Near East, and the first signs occur somewhere around 10,000 BC. We begin to see signs of the domestication of some of the animals of the neighborhood, principally sheep and goats to begin with, and then the pig comes in. Now, there may have been an earlier beginning in Southeast Asia. The finds that are taking place now in northern Thailand are really spectacular in transforming our picture of the origins of agriculture and so forth. But for the history of civilization in the Western world, this area of the Near East is crucial, decisive. Up to, let's say, 10,000 BC, all people were foraging nomads, hunters, and root and vegetable gatherers. Around 10,000 BC, the idea of domesticating your own food begins to take place. As a result of this, you have a more substantial and dependable economic base, and increasingly large communities can begin to build up. Brings in a whole new problem of cultural organization. You begin to have specialists. You begin to have people whose specialization is tilling the soil, others who are trading people, trading for goods with other centers. And you begin then also to have governing people who govern these enlarged communities, specialist tasks, the problem of organizing the community. And the organized community, the viable unit, which consists of, one can say, principally what turn out to be four castes: the governing, the priestly ones who keep in touch with the divine sources of dream and myth and spiritual information, the trading and merchant people, and the toiling peasants. These are coordinated around a spiritual center that represents the point that we're all, although we're differently trained, serving the same center. And the city itself becomes what we're calling today a mandala, a sacred circle with a center, and we're all related to that. Now, there were two different developments out of the early agricultural and domestication of animal base. In the riverlands and in the high mountain valleys where it was possible to raise crops, the accent would be on agriculture. In the broad grazing lands, the accent was on animal domestication. And so you have herding people. And there is a distinct separation as early, let's say, as the 8th and 7th centuries, the 7th millenniums, 8,000, 7,000 BC, between the settled agriculturalists and the still nomadic herding people. Where you have herders, the male is the important person. He's the one that is rounding up the animals, that is killing the animals and protecting this herd against another herd. So you have a warrior accent. Whereas when the toiling is that of agriculture, the relationship is to the earth, which is the mother. She brings forth life and she nourishes life, and so the female principle is a dominant one there. Now, in this Near East zone, there were three main groups of people in these divisions. One was the people in the riverlands and the high valleys, agriculturalists, whose principal deity was the goddess, who is the world mother. And the others were the two great herding communities, one in the north, in southern Europe, the Indo-Europeans, who were herders of cattle and who were the domesticators of the horse and invented the war chariot and became people of tremendous military power. And the other were the people of the Syro-Arabian desert, who are the Semites, and these were herders of sheep and goats, and later the domesticators of the camel, which became then the war camel, and so forth and so on. I think the earliest representation of the camel that we have in literature is in the Old Testament, where Rachel comes on a camel to Abraham. So we have these two warrior people fighting in on the relatively peaceful settled areas. And so we find around the 6th millennium BC that the little settled communities begin to have walls and the protection against these warrior people who were tough, fighting people and ruthless, whether they're Indo-European or Semites, the same story. There comes a time then when the shift of accent goes to these warrior people who have come in and become the overlords, the dominant ones over a toiling community. And this is what happens when, 2350 BC, we read of Sargon I, Sargon of Akkad. This was a Semitic monarch who comes in over the earlier Sumerian people. He comes in around, his date's about 2350 BC. Then about 2000 BC, there's a Sumerian restoration. And this is the period of building of many building of the great ziggurats, and most of our Sumerian texts come from this period. The very important king, important for us because the documents come from his time, King Gudea of Lagash. And it's in his libation vase. It's a little vase about so big with a symbol on it of a central post and 2 serpents with 7 interlocking. This is the earliest example we have of this caduceus. And then 2 cherubim, that's say lion birds, birds that are human, animal, bird-like with crowns, opening the portals of a gate to reveal this. This comes from Gudea of Lagash, 2000 BC. It's at that time that we have a Sumerian resurgence, but then in come another group of Semitic people and become dominant at the time of Hammurabi is around 1750 BC, and this is the time of the Gilgamesh story and the loss of the serpent power from the individual. It goes over to the serpents. It's a very interesting story. It's connected with the Gilgamesh. But that time, the cities are again having to defend themselves against more and more of these invading people. The Hebrews come in then a good while later as raiding people again. And you can read it in the book of Genesis, and the book of Exodus rather, and in Judges and Joshua of what happens to a city when these warrior people come in. And so you can see the wall is a very important protective feature, and the city then as the culture unit with its center and its spiritual life. The center is always a temple, so that the spiritual information is what coordinates and validates the city.